Hi, this is Tom Greco. This week we're talking about time management and goal setting and a host of other things wrapped around how we manage in our time and how we prioritize what we do. This is a rock that I keep on my nightstand, and it's a visual reminder for me of a story that I'd just like to share with you for a few moments. You see, there was a science teacher, and he was talking to students about priorities, and he asked them, what are your best priorities, or what are your top priorities? And the students kind of scratched their heads and kind of bantered back and forth exactly what they were, but they really hadn't figured out how to establish priorities. So what the professor did, or the teacher did, is he brought out this jar. And pretend there's a jar in front of me. It's a glass jar. And he stuck some big rocks inside. And he put a couple in, and then he said, "Class, is that jar full?" And some students said, "Yes." And he said, "You're absolutely wrong. That jar is not full." And so what he did is he reached under the table and he grabbed some gravel. And he grabbed this bag of gravel and poured it into this glass jar. And it filled up where the rocks weren't, and it filled up to the top. And then he asked the class, is the jar now full? And he got about a 50% yes, 50% no from his class. And he said, for those that said no, you're absolutely right. So then he reached under his table and he got another bag of sand, much finer grains, and poured it in there, and the sand went through the gravel where the rock wasn't at, and then filled up that space and went all the way up to the top of the jar. And then he asked, class, is now the jar filled? And again, he got about 50% said yes and 50% said no. And he said, for those that said no, you're absolutely right. So then he grabbed 2-gallon jugs of water and he poured those gallons of water into the jar, and that water went where the sand wasn't, where the gravel wasn't, where the rock wasn't, and filled up to the top and kind of bubbled over. And he said, now class, is that jar filled? And the students kind of looked at him and said, we're really not sure. And then one young man raised his hat in the back and said, no. And the professor said, why? He said, because there's always room for Jell-O. And the professor said, no, you're absolutely wrong. That jar is filled. That jar is now filled to the top. And then he stood back and had him look at the jar, and he said, what does that tell you about life? What does that tell you about priorities? And the students kind of scratched their head a little bit and began to think and said, well, it tells you no matter how busy your day is, sir, you can always find time to put things in. And he said, yeah, you're right in one point, but you're absolutely wrong in the other point. You see, if you're going to put your priorities, if you're going to focus in on priorities or your big rocks, you must put those first in every day. If you don't put your big rocks in, if you don't put your priorities and plan for your priorities, then the sand and the gravel and the water of your day will slowly fill up that time. And at the end of the day, you'll have this rock in your hand outside the jar, and you will not have it accomplished. And so as we look at this week, and as you look at developing your goals and developing time management skills and priorities, think about what are your big rocks in life. What are the things that you need to put in your jar called a day, or called a week, or called a month? And are you doing that on a regular basis? This is why I keep that rock on my nightstand, because one of the things that's very important to me, and I think you can see it from my biography and the way I respond to you, hopefully, is I believe that I need to put prayer and time with God into my day schedule every day. If I don't do that, and then the water, the sand, the gravel of my day will slowly fill up, and I'll find at the end of the day that I hadn't put this big rock in. And that's just for me. For you, it might be totally different stuff. It might be playing with your kids. It might be spending time with your spouse. It may be time to read and to study, or whole various different things. But just remember, you got to put that big rock in first. And you got to make time for that, or the sand, the gravel, and the water of your day will slowly fill up your day. I hope this helps. I look forward to talking with you online. And as we say in Phoenix, let's get to work.